Welcome to the History from the Archives. In the coming month of April 2021, the Philippines will be celebrating the 500th year of the introduction of Christianity. And one of the surviving icons of this historic event is the widely venerated Santo Nino de Cebu. Culled from the archival and bibliographic collections of the Archivo de los Padres Agustinos de Filipinas in Valladolid, Spain, this episode will discuss briefly the history of the devotion to the Santo Nino de Cebu. But before I proceed in my discussion, I wish to express my gratitude to a number of persons and institutions. Among them is Dr. Jobers Bersales and Father Jun Ribaila of the University of San Carlos, Father Erickson Bore of the convent of Archivo de los Padres Agustinos de Filipinas in Valladolid, and of course Spain's Ministerio de Defensa, which enabled me to get an assistance, a grant, to do research in this important archive of the Augustinians in preparation for the 500th year of the celebration. And likewise to Fray Rick Anthony Reyes of the Basilica de Santo Nino de Cebu. The Santo Nino is believed to owe its origin to the coming of the Magellan expedition in the Philippines in 1521. Of course, we know that from the writings of Antonio Pigafetta, which says that he gave this image to Queen Juana upon the baptism of the couple, Raja Humabon, and of course the wife, one of the wives, the youngest apparently from among the wives of Humabon, and she was given a Christian name of Juana. And the words of Pigafetta says, during that time, they showed her an image of Our Lady, of wood, holding her little child, which was very well made, and a cross. After that, she begged us to give her the little wooden boy to put in the place of the idols. Here it was clear that the image of the child Jesus Juana requested was the one held by the Virgin Mother, and not a separate statue. This was further established by the report of Pigafetta of Magellan's reaction on this gift to Juana a few days after the baptism, and he says, "The captain on that occasion approved of the gift which I had made to the queen of the image of the infant Jesus, and recommended her to put it in the place of her idols, because it was a remembrance of the Son of God." From this same source, it was implied that the owner of the image was Antonio Pigafetta. Nevertheless, nothing was mentioned as to the place of its origin, where it came from. As Pigafetta had mentioned, he brought it, and it was given to the couple. But we know from Spain that a tradition already existed even during the medieval age of this devotion to Mary and the child. And in Spain, the most favorite iconographic representation of this mother and child image was known as the Nuestra Señora de Atocha, or the Lady of the Atocha. This was venerated in the suburbs of Madrid, a street named Atocha, which was one of the places at the time, since the medieval age, had been already inhabited by the Moors. And it is there were a number of stories about supposedly miracles performed by the Santo Nino, or the Lady of the Atocha, in which the child Jesus figured prominently. Among them is the belief that the child was actually bringing food to the Christian prisoners by the Moors. The Moors, it is said, would not allow matured people to bring food because they suspected that the visitors might be bringing something which would probably help the prisoners escape, or for whatever reason. They forbid the older people to bring food and visit the prisoners. But then it is said that only the young people were allowed. And it is said that those people who do not have children were surprised that there was a young boy who would be visiting their relatives, and this boy would be bringing food. And it is said that when the people visited the chapel of the Santo Nino, the baby Jesus in this iconographic representation of the Nuestra Senora de la Atocha, they said that they noticed that the feet of the child showing some signs that it had traveled, and so they believed that it was the child Jesus that was going to the prison. Another miracles attributed to the child Jesus was that it facilitated childbirth. And so people of Atocha especially developed certain kind of an affection to the child Jesus and would call child Jesus as El Partero, meaning to say the midwife. So these are some of the stories connected with the Santo Nino. But the Santo Nino devotion did not only spread in Europe from the Iberian Peninsula, but it also crossed the Atlantic Ocean, so that by 1554, a devotion was already introduced in South America and Mexico by the Augustinians. And there in South America and Mexico in particular, with the discovery of the silver mines there, it is said that the Santo Nino again manifested his miracles, because there was a certain kind of accident that happened, and the Santo Nino was said to have recovered some of those people buried in these mines during an accident. So it became very, very popular because of that. But here in the Philippines, an apparent miracle, and according to the members of the Legazpi expedition, that it was in a way miraculous that they found the image 44 years after Magellan's death in Cebu, when the Legazpi expedition landed in Cebu. And it's probably providential to say that almost exactly 44 years after the death of Magellan in April 27, 1521, by April 27, 1565, the battle began in Cebu between the forces of Legazpi and the natives of Cebu, led by Tupas, the son-in-law of Raja Humabon. And as the natives abandoned the settlement of Cebu, the Spanish conquistadores advanced and reconnoitered the area towards the hinterland. And in one of the abandoned houses, it's described as a small, without furnishing, a poor house. The owner of the house was a poorer family. They found this image of the Santo Nino. A document from the Archivo de los Padres Agustinos de Filipinas, dated May 16, 1565, executed by Fernando Riquel, who was the escribano of the Legazpi expedition, provided a brief description of how it was found. And it says that it was on April 28, 1565, when the Spanish conquistadores entered and landed in Cebu and started reconnoitering the pueblo, de Cebu as they call it. And a Spaniard entered a particular house. The Spanish name was Juan de Camus, a native of Bermeo in Vizcaya. And the house was described as a small, it's a humble house, small, with few furnishings. And they found there this image of Santo Nino kept in a wooden fine box with its woolly and colored headgear. As the Spanish document statement says, Gorro de Flueco Billodo de Lana Colorada, as the document described it in 16th century Spanish. The men of Legazpi suspected that based on the characteristics of the materials, these were actually made in Flanders in Belgium. While most of the crew were aware that Magellan had been to Cebu and that other expeditions had made their landfall in Cebu prior to the Legazpi expedition, no one had any evidence linking this image to the Magellan expedition. But the earliest to theorize that it had something to do with the Magellan expedition was a certain friar by the name of Fray Esteban de Salazar. According to this famous the 17th century Augustinian chronicler, Fray Gaspar de San Agustin, Fray Salazar had talked to Fray Andres de Urdaneta and Fray Andres de Aguirre. These two were members of the first batch of the Augustinians which came with the Legazpi expedition, and they definitely were eyewitness to the event. And according to Fray Esteban de Salazar, to quote him, "The Spaniards entered the city of Cebu and attacked it with sword in hand. Some soldiers sacked the house of one of the leaders. They broke open a chest and discovered a beautiful bust of the child Jesus, just like the ones from Flanders, among numerous cloths and flowers, without being able to inquire from whence the divine image came to the hands of the barbarians, or even the reason for the reverence they seemed to have for it. It is true that I heard some years later from the illustrious Gonzalo de las Casas that the image could have been a remnant from the Magellan's voyage who stopped at those islands. They also found a cape of hemp on him that was non-existent anywhere on the land." So here there seems to be some discrepancies between that of Riquel's statement and that of Fray Salazar. Riquel says it was found in a humble house, a poor house, but here it says that it was found in the house of one of the leaders of the Legazpi expedition, and it was found in some kind of a place where there was many clothes and many flowers. Well, this is quite significant because had this been true, then we could probably surmise that the house belonged to one of the leaders, or probably it belonged to somebody who is important in the community, probably a native priestess or a native priest. The reason is because Fray Juan Grijalba was saying that Fray Grijalba, by the way, was an Augustinian who wrote one of the earliest chronicles of the Augustinian mission in the Philippines, although he was based in South America. Grijalba wrote history of the Augustinians in the Philippines and in South America in 1634, something like that. And so it's quite still very near to the event. And he says that there was a certain kind of a tradition among the natives of Cebu, apparently even before the coming of the Legazpi expedition, that they venerated the image, and it says that the image was actually being used to for a certain ritual asking for rain, and the natives would bring the image to the sea or to any body of water, and they would ask the image to bring down rain, because unless rain falls, then they would not take the image out of the water. So it's quite a interesting story, a certain ritual, but they were performing such kind of ritual. And in fact, by the early part of the 1600s, Father Francisco Colin, a Jesuit historian, was saying that the natives in fact regarded the Santo Nino as a sort of their diwata. So we do not know, probably even at the time when Christianity was already introduced, certain kind of a mixture of native religious rituals was actually interspersed or blended with the Catholic devotion to the Santo Nino. But then, we do not really know exactly, for example, the height of the image. The rector of the Basilica de Santo Nino was telling me that today, the measurement is 18 inches. And it's consistent with the measurement that we have way back in the early 1600s. For example, the Augustinian chronicler who spent his missionary work in Cebu around 1630, Fray Juan de Medina, says that it has the height of 1.5 feet or 18 inches. And it's also consistent with the account of an Augustinian recollet, Fray Luis de Jesus, who wrote his Chronicle of the Augustinian Order in the early 1600s, and he says that it has the height of a media bara, which of course would be equivalent to about 18 inches. Fray Agandur Muris, another Augustinian who was assigned in Cebu in the late 16th century and developed great interest on what happened during the Magellan expedition. In fact, he interviewed a number of people, of older people there, who, if they were not witnesses to the events, must have heard the stories of what happened during the Magellan expedition in Cebu. And Fray Agandoro Muris was also of the suspicion that the image of the Santo Nino actually came from the Magellan expedition. He was saying that when the expedition escaped and abandoned Cebu, they probably left this. But of course, he failed to consider the fact that it was actually given to a ruling couple of Cebu. From this brief discussion, we hope to have provided you with basic archival materials culled from the archival sources on the history of the Santo Nino, so that the celebration of the Feast of the Santo Nino and also of the forthcoming celebration of the 500 years of the introduction of Christianity may be more meaningful for us and can fully appreciate not only the religious implication of this, but its historic relevance to Filipinos of the present. For your questions, you may write it down on the comment section, which will be answered in our next episode as we journey in our history from the archives. Viva Pit Señor!